Hello and welcome to Game and Read. I'm Erin.
And I am Peter.
And we're here to kick off our next game and book pairing, The Twins from Hell.
Twins from Hell.
Our game is Assassin's Creed
Syndicate.
And our book is From Hell.
From Hell. From Hell by
But
Alan Moore.
and Eddie Campbell. Peter, will you tell us a little bit about Assassin's Creed Syndicate?
Yeah, just a primer on what we're doing in this episode. It is an introduction. We're going to go over the basics of these two properties together and kind of set up the discussions to come nice and short for you. So, Assassin's Creed Syndicate came out way back in the ripe old year of 2015.
Ooh,
so long ago. Yes, it was both developed and published by Ubisoft, which is an interesting thing to say because Ubisoft is literally one of the largest developer publishing companies in all of video games. They have studios across the entire globe in so many different countries, and they produce hundreds and hundreds of games and things, a lot of which are very large, blockbustery games. Assassin's Creed Syndicate in particular was developed by the Ubisoft Quebec team and studio that's located in Quebec City, Canada. You know, for all you Quebecois French Canadians, that is, one of your hometown studios. This is an interesting choice in that all previous major games of the Assassin's Creed series were developed by the Montreal studio of Ubisoft.
Are Montreal and Quebec rivals? I know nothing about Canada.
You'd have to ask a French Canadian, and who wants to ask a French Canadian anything except, where a good place to drink Canadian wine is.
Canadian wine? You mean
I assume they like it.
Isn't that Canadian whiskey?
The Canadians can like wine. The Canadian whiskey is specifically like a thing from the Prohibition era, and we're getting a little off track here. Point is, Quebec City is the capital, although it is, I believe, significantly smaller than the city of Montreal. So maybe there's a little bit of a rivalry there. It's kind of maybe the New York City versus Albany thing where it's like, we're the state capital, but it's like, we're the major metropolitan area.
Got it.
Point is, this is a smaller studio and the first one to spearhead a Assassin's Creed game that wasn't the originators of that particular series. I will say it's fairly interesting that this studio was selected, expanded into making this game, and I believe it did come with kind of a large expansion in the studio. My understanding of how the Ubisoft system works is that one of their larger studios will spearhead their larger games, and then a lot of the smaller studios will develop assets, develop different things, do different aspects of the game development, kind of creating this cohesive picture. So while they have studios in America, Canada, Asia, Europe, because they're a French company originally, they will use different teams to do different things to make these enormous games like the Assassin's Creed games. However, before they were able to make this game in 2015, their resume is not amazing from the Quebec team of Ubisoft. So going down the line here, some of the choice ones they have on here. Open Season, the video game. Are you familiar with the film Open Season?
I have seen the previews they show on TV.
What about Surf's Up?
That's the penguins.
That's the penguin surfing video game.
That feels like something you would watch / play.
I've never seen it, and I definitely wouldn't play it, but they developed or at least ported it, potentially. I'm a little unsure what role they played on all these. So they've got those two. They did some work on, say, Prince of Persia, The Forgotten Sands, a 2010 Wii exclusive Prince of Persia game.
That feels sad.
Yeah, so they were certainly not the major players of Ubisoft. And so while they had worked on some of that side stuff for the Assassin's Creed series, this was certainly a large switch to give them this large of a game. Now, based on the overall picture of what Ubisoft has published, this isn't too unexpected. They've made a lot of third-party licensed games for films, TV shows, what have you, over the years. It's really what made them a lot of their kind of bread and butter. Ubisoft, however, is very famous for some of the large series they have made since their inception in 1986. This includes the Assassin's Creed franchise, which they've been making since 2007. A lot of games in that series. I think they're up to 10-ish, depending on which ones of the side ones you count. They also have the Tom Clancy series, large number of games. Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege, I think, is still a pretty popular multiplayer game out there from a few years ago. Also, the Rayman series.
I love the Rayman series.
Not necessarily the biggest franchise, but certainly their kind of mascot platformer of the 90s that still has a legacy today. They're fun. I like the 2D ones, definitely. And then they also are known for, what do you think this probably their most popular franchise is? I might even top Assassin's Creed.
Wait, is it the treasure hunter white Indiana Jones man?
No. That's Naughty Dog. So you're thinking of Uncharted.
Yeah, that's the one.
Think more casual and fun and something you have probably played and owned at some point.
Played and owned?
Yes, this is also one of the few games that still gets published for the Wii, the original Wii console.
I don't know.
It's also the name of a Lady Gaga song.
Just Dance!
Yes, Ubisoft makes the immensely popular Just Dance series.
I would like, for the record, I've never played Just Dance. I've
Really?
never owned Just Dance. Your girl was a Dance Dance Revolution chick as a child.
You never evolved to Just Dance?
No. Had a mat, plugged it into my PlayStation 2.
Right, but that was
Fabulous.
passé by like 2009. You never swung a Wiimote around?
You know what? You are passé in 2009.
I'm not
okay?
saying it wasn't still fun. I was just saying it wasn't in the zeitgeist of those latter years. Anyways, this is a studio that makes a lot of just kind of large tentpole games. They just make tons of stuff out there. So it's weird to talk about Ubisoft as something that people don't know about, or it's very easy to research this company as far as just the basics of what they do, what they put out, and everything. They're one of the major players behind things like Sony and Nintendo. They just don't make their own console, so they're just one of the biggest separate third-party game developers in the world. Moving on to the game itself, Assassin's Creed Syndicate is set in 1868 London, England. It is the Victorian era, and industry has transformed the landscape and society of England. You play as both Evie and Jacob Fry, twin siblings and born and bred assassins. They have come to London in hopes to rip it from Templar control. In case you aren't familiar with the Assassin's Creed games, there's two major factions. There are the Assassins, who are generally kind of seen as the good guys, and there are the Templars, who are kind of seen as the bad guys. Templars seek to control society through power and kind of a false hold on religion. There's definitely some religious stuff going on, whereas the Assassins are a little bit more about freedom and people rights, but they get there by doing a lot of murders and sometimes some shady shit. Through their escapades, they meet many prominent English people and slowly disassemble the Templars' gangs and organizations. And that's kind of the whole premise. You wind up in the city of London. It's a big open world game. You have dozens and dozens of missions. You unlock different parts of the map as you go. And you kind of just explore the Ubisoft's version of 1868 London, England.
And for this pairing in particular, we are focusing on DLC, which is downloadable content. That's an acronym I didn't know.
What, you didn't know
recently.
DLC before?
Well, I mean, like within the last year or two. Anyway, we're moving on. We are focusing on the DLC.
And not the words Aaron doesn't know.
Of Jack the Ripper, which is a standalone in that you don't have to play any of the main Assassin's Creed Syndicate to play Jack the Ripper.
That being said, you do have to own it. So if you want to play just the Jack the Ripper, you still have to get the base game before you get it. And specifically, the Jack the Ripper, since the Jack the Ripper murders did not happen in 1868, this game takes place in 1888, where you are coming back as just Evie Fry. She has been summoned back to London by her brother Jacob to dive into what's going on with these murders in the Whitechapel neighborhood of London. Jacob also disappears during this time, and it's up to Evie to release London from the terror of these murderers and whoever this Jack the Ripper character may be. Along the way through this game, you meet numerous important people from these particular eras. From the base game, some of the folks you'll end up meeting are Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone. This is before he invented the telephone. Charles Darwin, famous naturalist scientist to develop the theory of evolution. Florence Nightingale, the mother of modern nursing. Queen Victoria, the queen of the time, who you end up, saving, because of course you do. You gotta save the queen if you're in London at some point. And Inspector Aberline, who becomes much more prominent in the Jack the Ripper DLC, as he was the head inspector during those particular murders. This is a pretty common trope of the Assassin's Creed series. They always like to work in, at least going back to Assassin's Creed 2, a lot of the famous people of that particular era. Generally, it's a little anachronistic because it's like, what are the odds they're just hanging around and will build inventions for you? But I know it's something they've done going back to the Assassin's Creed 2, which was set in the Renaissance with like Leonardo da Vinci. He'll build, assassin blades for you because he's an inventor. And, just kind of things like that. It's a fun way of throwing in a little bit of Ubisoft's version of historical flavor. They're very big on throwing in that historical flavor, whether or not it's good history or just kind of fun history or what have you. Oh, I forgot to mention one of the biggest guests they have, Karl Marx.
Ooh.
You have missions in which you help Karl Marx do stuff, but it's kind of a weird take on him, not necessarily in the game, but in the description, and we'll get into that next week when we're actually dissecting these games and the things happening in them. That's about all I have for Assassin's Creed Syndicate. Aaron, anything you want to add on that?
And I'll save it for our next episode.
All right.
Our book for this pairing is From Hell by Alan Moore and Eddie Campbell. From Hell is a graphic novel. Alan Moore and Eddie Campbell started it in 1988 and then completed and collected it in one trade paperback volume in 1999, 11 years later. This is a story of Jack the Ripper and the Whitechapel murders. It is a big book, big trade paperback comic at 570 pages. So it is a chunky one. It, like I said, they started it in 1988, which was the 100th anniversary of the Whitechapel murders. And Alan Moore really focuses on the events of 1988, tried to keep the story itself close to what actually happened, as far as what we know about it.
Right, and one of the things with that is that he does base it off a particular conspiracy theory, one of the more popular ones. We're not going to dissect it too much here, but it is still, it's not 100% factual because the details around the Whitechapel Jack the Ripper murders are not 100% there. But it is he sets kind of a set idea of what could have happened and dramatizes it.
If you want to look into it, it's the Stephen Knight theory, which the 5-second summary is Jack the Ripper was a part of a conspiracy because of an illegitimate royal baby. If you want to know more, go do that reading on your own. But that's the world that Alan Moore was writing in. He recruited Eddie Campbell to do the art. Eddie Campbell had not drawn any horror comics up to this point. He had his last comic was sort of this odd, it wasn't quite horror, but it was sort of strange and oddball, and Alan Moore saw it and thought it would be perfect for the story that he wanted to tell.
He does have a very distinctive black and white sketchy style, so it can be very inducing of dread, drama, grittiness, however you want to kind of put it. It is very, I don't know the right word for it yet, but it's not traditional comic book art a la, some of his other work, such as, Watchmen or even V for Vendetta. It is a very much more distinctive look to it, and not necessarily one that is always ostensibly beautiful by some standards, but it's very stunning in a lot of ways.
In interviews, Alan Moore has talked about the gritty realism of Eddie Campbell's drawing and sketchy work, and that it brings this dark realism to these scenes of horror, and even just like, it might not be exactly horror, the scene in particular, or panel in particular, but just the sense of dread. It really comes through. In fact, so Eddie Campbell in an interview talked about his black and white sketchiness. Black and white in the late 80s was a super common thing, especially in Europe and in England and English comics. Eddie Campbell talks about, color is expensive at that time before you have these
definitely printing it.
The digitization has helped, but you didn't have that in 1988. And a master volume of From Hell was released in the 2000s, and it was fully colored. And Eddie Campbell did an interview with Alan Gibson, and he talked about Campbell talked about how he was really opposed to the colorizing at first. He felt like it would lose some of that grittiness and just the intricate detail. And to be fair, Campbell didn't really have a lot of trust in the digitizing of color. He felt it was just going to make it too sort of simple.
Now, you saying that makes me think that this guy was definitely a good working partner for Alan Moore, who has a long history of being unhappy with the way his works are often treated once they kind of become more legacy products, more legacy pieces of art. Alan Moore is he's got a very particular views on the world. He considers himself kind of a socialist anarchist type. He actively doesn't vote in elections. However, he is changing that for the upcoming UK election, where he's voting Labour. Although he released a statement basically being like, I'm still not crazy about government, but this is the first one I kind of like. He's to a lot of people, he's kind of a weird, crotchety man who likes magic and strange things, but he also created a lot of the more famous stories of the 1980s that still last with us today, with Watchmen, V for Vendetta, From Hell. Eventually he got around to the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And if you're saying like, wow, all those things have kind of mediocre movies attached to them, that's kind of the point. He is a very anti-corporate person. However, in order to get comics published, you kind of have to go through companies, and so he doesn't have full ownership rights of a lot of his more famous works, meaning that they can often get retooled in certain ways. Suddenly a prequel series or a sequel series will be made without his blessing in any way, shape, or form, and it goes kind of completely against his artist's intent. And I'm getting a little off track here, but I think the fact that he is unhappy with how some of the changes went in the future kind of speaks to they're in a similar boat there, and that's kind of where they stand as creators.
And From Hell has its own film adaptation. A 2001 film version of From Hell came out with Johnny Depp and Heather Graham. So if you
Heather
need a
Graham's
little,
only in great movies.
If you need a little viewing, I suppose. But getting back to the book itself, it was released in volumes of a magazine over the course of multiple years. And so it wasn't until 1999 that it was compiled in one trade paperback. It won multiple Eisner Awards, including Best Serialized Story in 1993, Best Writer in 1995, 96, and 97, and Best Graphic Album Reprint in 2000. So this is a very highly acclaimed, well-regarded work.
Yeah, it definitely is, but I think it kind of winds up on almost the second tier of well-known Alan Moore ones, just because things like Watchmen and V for Vendetta kind of stand at the top of like, everyone knows those ones. And this is kind of like the next one down, where it's not a later work, but it's a little bit after those and a little bit different, and certainly a little less approachable to some people who like more traditional superhero-related comics. For the purposes of this particular discussion, when we talk about the creators of From Hell, we are going to often reference both of them together. This stems really from my understanding of how Alan Moore approaches writing comic books and how he approaches doing the partnership of art and writing. While he is the primary person writing the dialogue and the settings and the words, he relies heavily on the artist to co-create with him, to set those scenes, to design the characters, to design a lot of things about them, and it is really kind of a partnership to it. If, we liken this a little bit more to film, one is a little bit more the director, one's a little bit more the screenwriter, and they have to work together to create a really cohesive work. So while Alan Moore is often kind of solo accredited for a lot of his things, we want to make sure that we actively give credit to the artist as well. And so we'll be doing that throughout this discussion as kind of a mutual team creation of this book. That's all we have for you for this introduction episode. Look forward to next week as we go in depth with each piece individually for our discussion, and then the following week when we pair them together and talk about how they connect to one another. You can find all of our posts and episodes on gameandread.wordpress.com.
You can find me on Instagram at A Tale of Two Shelves.
You can find my Twitter at NerdInTheWorld.
Our intro music was written and performed by Avery Murchison, and there's a link to his Bandcamp in the description.
Thanks for listening.
We'll see you next time.
Game and read.
Fuck you.
Fuck a me, fuck a you. That's what I think about that.
Is it now?